Hey, what's going on, fight fans? Hey, this is Coach D, the Wild Man, coming at you again with another episode of MMA Fight Camp. All right, you know I do an MMA Fight Camp. I talk about all things MMA from the pro scene to the local scene. All right, today we're going to mix it up. Today we're getting into wrestling, which is another thing that I consider myself a very passionate fan of. And I always want to talk about new stories. I want to go in new directions. I want to keep the fans up to date on where we're going in the sport of wrestling. So I have Chris Fargo, which is a longtime friend of mine, and I have Patrick Towery, if I'm saying his last name right. He's doing great things in Mississippi, and he's trying to let the world know that he wants to throw his hat in the ring and make sure that wrestling grows in the state of Mississippi and becomes a main staple. So we're gonna let him talk about himself and what his plans are from the future. So Patrick, how you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. I actually just got done spending a week over at Ironclad Wrestling in Birmingham, Alabama. Just getting reacclimated to the sport, getting used to that wrestling room environment, and kind of figuring out ways that I can better myself as a coach. So I'm on like a high right now.
Okay, awesome. So if kind of catch the fans up of who you are, how you got started, and what's your goals for Mississippi?
Sure. Hey, so hey everyone. My name is Patrick Towery. I am a board member of the Mississippi Wrestling Foundation. Our goal is to grow the sport of wrestling in the state of Mississippi at the youth, high school, and collegiate levels. And I also serve as an assistant wrestling coach at Oxford Wrestling Club in Oxford, Mississippi, as well as Tupelo Wrestling Club in Tupelo, Mississippi. Just a little bit of context. Up until a few weeks ago, Mississippi was the only state in the union that did not have a wrestling season at the high school level. We just received approval from our state athletic association to host a wrestling season and to have an invitational championship at the end. So we have done it. We have made it to the final frontier of American wrestling, and Mississippi joins the rest of the nation as the 50th and final state to host wrestling.
So you have an invitational this year. What's the plan? Like, what's the timeline for? I don't know what Mississippi is, MSHSA or whatever. I don't know what they are down there, but
yeah, it's an acronym kind of like that. I think it's Mississippi State High School Activities Association.
Oh, the
something along those lines.
Okay. What's the timeline for them being like for them to run it, like to get them to run a tournament like the other 50 states have? You know what I mean? Like it says it's invitational tournament. So I'm assuming that's like a preliminary tournament for them to gauge based on when they want to start actually saying, hey, this is the official high school league state tournament, just like the football championships or anything else.
Chris, that's a really good question. And the answer isn't as simple as I'd like it to be. But the High School Athletics Association or Activities Association has said that once we reach about 50% of school participation within the state, they'll change the invitational into a real legitimate state championship. So we're kind of taking a book out of what the guys did in Arkansas. They kind of like started the sport and did everything themselves. The Mississippi Wrestling Foundation is kind of taking a page out of what they did. We're going to be running a lot of the logistics ourselves, officials, certification, coach clinics, you name it. We're really like starting this as a grassroots effort and building it up. Right now, we have 11 schools signed on board for this season, and with that comes, a lot of financial fundraising needs, getting equipment to these schools. So the undertaking is kind of massive in scale for what we need to do to start wrestling. But I think as we plant the seeds of having a wrestling team in one of these locations, that it's going to start blossoming out to some of the neighbor schools. And I think, to get to the question of like the timeline, I really think within 3 to 5 years, you'll start seeing like half of the public school populace in Mississippi adopting wrestling as a sport and participating in it. This is a very competitive athletic state, and I think there's a great interest in having wrestling brought to a lot of these high schools.
Are you including the private schools too? Are you trying to get the private schools on board in the same league?
Yeah, so we do have interest from, I think it's St. Andrews down in Jackson, and quite frankly, with how small we are, just starting out, you need as much participation as possible, and that's going to come from those private schools in addition to some of the public schools as well.
So let's say you get this all sorted out. You got 11 schools. Starting off with, what number is like half? How many roughly do you need to get to that half number?
We need about 100 to get to half.
Okay.
We do. I think realistically, within 2 seasons, we can get about 30 schools participating, and then from there, it's going to increase exponentially. Once people see like this sport, how popular it is, how much people like it, and how much it translates to some of the other sports as well.
Okay, Patrick, let me ask you a question. Does not just your town, but does Mississippi have a history of wrestling? So I know you're trying to get it all done. What made you decide I want wrestling here if there's no history of it beforehand? If you get what I'm saying.
I do. So the history of wrestling in Mississippi is kind of spotty. To my understanding, starting in 1974, there were roughly 10 to 15 schools within the state that were competing against each other. They continued that all the way up through the mid-80s. And it's really hard to find, people that are familiar with the sport of wrestling in the state of Mississippi at that time, why it died out. But from that time period, there's been one school that has kept their program, and that's the Mississippi School of the Blind. So they continue to keep up that tradition of wrestling. It's been a great sport for their athletes, and they compete almost in their own league, if you will. Personally, I just recently separated from the military. I came from Fort Carson, Colorado, the gym of the Army, beautiful place. And I moved back down to Mississippi to be close to family, right? I've missed out on kind of like being a part of my family and that connective tissue with them for the past 12 years.
I understand that.
Yeah. When I got back to Mississippi, I noticed that there was this strong resurgence of activity and people that were interested in bringing this sport to the state. When I was a young high school, wrestling in Pennsylvania, would come back to Oxford for Thanksgiving. And when I came back, there was no place to train, so I'd link up with the judo guys or the karate guys, and we'd grapple. And they'd show me a little bit of their sport, and I'd take that back with me back up to Pennsylvania. But it was very apparent to me growing up that wrestling was lacking in this state. So there was that awareness when I moved back. Brian Fox, he's the head coach over at Tupelo. He's also the vice president of the Mississippi Wrestling Foundation. He's been instrumental in doing a lot of the administrative and logistics work to get this effort on the road. He set up the 501c3 nonprofit, the bank account. He did a lot of the stuff that I think is necessary for a statewide effort to have success. And I think he got on a podcast called Wrestling Changed My Life. And I heard that podcast, and I knew that this was a guy that I had to link up with, that he had something special going on, and I wanted to be a part of it. Yeah. That's kind of where it is.
Okay, so what were some of the hurdles? So like I said, now you have to present it to a board, to a body of people who are not even thinking about wrestling until you brought it up. So how did you warm them up to the idea of now not only building a program but spending money for that program to succeed? What kind of hurdles do you have to overcome to make that happen?
Hey Darren, that's been like the question, right? That's been the question that we're all trying to solve. Yeah. How do we tackle this problem and do it well? And we've kind of been stumbling through it, right? I know that Brian and another one of our members, Brandon Beckerdike in Oxford, they pitched that idea to a lot of the school boards, and sometimes it was like them going in with a notepad and like an idea and a vision, and getting those school boards like bought into the idea of bringing on that program. I think one of the potential reasons, we don't really know why, one of the potential reasons why Mississippi wrestling started to go away was with potentially Title IX and funding issues. So we've pitched this idea of bringing wrestling to each of the high schools as not only a boys sport, but also doing boys and girls wrestling. So Mississippi also becomes, in addition to the 50th and final state for boys wrestling, I believe we're the 33rd state to have girls wrestling as well. So one of the big hurdles that we have, in addition to like presenting this foreign concept of scholastic folk style wrestling to the schools, is how are we going to execute, right? And a lot of that's like getting mats, headgear, singlets, uniforms, getting officials to do the sport. So we've undertaken a pretty significant fundraising campaign to provide each one of those schools with a wrestling mat, singlets for every weight class, headgear, some of those basic items that I think when I was a high school wrestler, I took for granted. And now that I'm on the other side of it, seeing how the magic happens, man, I am extremely grateful for the work that the booster clubs and the wrestling coaches and the school admins did to help make guys like me successful in that program. I do want to give a quick shout out. I think I'm going to butcher his name, but he's a legend in the sport. Ken Shurtow. Yeah, he hooked us up with a really good deal with mats. I think he provided 5 or 6 mats for deeply discounted price. I think that's just going to pay dividends in the future.
And that was my next question. I was going to ask you, did you have to reach out to some, legendary names in the sport of wrestling that you can kind of get them to add some, extra gravy onto your pitch? But you already said you already had a legend already go to bat for you. So That you answer that question.
Yeah, hey, Daniel Court, you're listening, man. We need some help, right? Hey, it's kind of hard to find that connective tissue with legends in the sport that also have either a connection and interest in growing wrestling in this state because we don't have a history. We don't have a history of doing it. We don't really have a background. So that the networking is also a big component of how we make this effort sustainable.
And that was the kind of the conversation where I'm thinking about in my head. Normally, somebody would graduate, go to college, become a star, and come back to their hometown and bring on the next generation. But if you never had that iconic, shift, you have a void of talent that people will remember. You know what I'm saying? My dad remembered this person. So he taught me about that person, and I know that person. I teach my son. We don't have that generational growth of the sport. So how did they perceive it? I mean, what were some of the things they were thinking of matching wrestling to baseball, wrestling to basketball, sports that's already established that would generate revenue. So how did they end up deciding to go, okay, let's do this? What was the one thing you could say that made them go, okay, let's do this?
They don't got to pay for it.
Yeah. That's right, Chris. It's taking on that burden of funding that effort in getting all the necessary pieces, like where they need to be, pitching the idea and also like having a solution, right? That's one of the things that we did in the military. When you go to your commander, you don't go with just a problem.
Yeah.
You go to your commander with a problem and you go with like 2 or 3 courses of action, let them like make that side decision on what they're going to do. So that's kind of the approach that we had, right? We approached the schools with that problem set. Hey, wrestling doesn't exist. We think we can do it, and here's how we're going to do it. All we need is for you guys to say yes. So that's been kind of an easy pitch. But the skills that you develop in wrestling, I'm probably preaching to the crowd, right? This is a mixed martial arts show. You guys know that what you do in wrestling translates very well to other sports. The neural pathways that you develop as a wrestling athlete on a blast double, man, that's a form tackle, right? That is football. Side shuffle. That goes into our footwork. Cross step, back step, lateral drop. I mean, there's so many things that you do. Go ahead, Chris.
Have you approached the football coaches at these schools when you're pitching the idea?
That's one of the things I want to do. I want to go up to the football coaches and say, hey, let me take your guys. I just want to do like 1 or 2 practices and just get them into this really intense environment where they can go out and shine as warriors. And I think that'll be a good segue to also recruit athletes into wrestling.
Oh, absolutely.
So Patrick,
Darren.
So now that guys, guys have always known about wrestling. How has the perception been? But now you got females on board as well because they're growing in other states. How did the women perceive bringing wrestling to the young girls?
Well, hey, Darren, Mississippi is like so. We're definitely a football state. Yeah. We're definitely a baseball state. Like Mississippi State just brought home the national title.
Like every southern state.
Yeah. But something else that our state has a great depth in is this mixed martial arts culture. There's a great depth of fighters and a great depth of academies coming out of Mississippi. If you look at the per capita rate of like fighters to population, we're kind of a small state. I think we're a little less than 2.5 million. Don't quote me, although I know you guys will. This is recorded. But here's we got a pretty large amateur and professional mixed martial arts scene up in North Mississippi. We have, I think Bellator comes down to Biloxi, I believe. We have like a thriving mixed martial arts community down south too. So with that comes with male and female fighters. We have like a great depth of female fighters too. I think Anna Guy just made her Bellator MMA debut. She's a fighter out of Columbus, Mississippi. So there's definitely like that cultural norm here that we have women who fight, and this is probably one of the most important components you can have in that sport of mixed martial arts, is being able to dictate where the fight goes. You know, if you want to take a fight to the ground, you got to have wrestling. You got to have that wrestling base. Judo is also acceptable, albeit probably not as good as us. And if you want to keep the fight standing, hey, guess what? Shut your belt, brawl and brawl. I mean, you gotta have the ability to wrestle on your feet, to apply pressure on the bottom. So I say all that to say this: it's very palatable for Mississippians.
Okay,
so I think
have you?
We want our.
So I want to circle back to something that Darren said about not having people like graduate and then go to college and come back and all that. Well, I mean, Alabama's at that point. Georgia's at that point, right? Alabama hasn't been around that long, and they got multiple kids in D1. They got the Latona, Virginia Tech, right? I think Corey Land's like the number 2 ranked kid in the country at 26 from Alabama. And they started basically from scratch. Georgia essentially was non-existent 15 years ago, and now they're the biggest D1 source in the Southeast. When coaches come south, they go to Georgia, right? So I mean, the ability to do it's there. You just got to get the first one out. And Alabama's like just getting to that point where they're starting to get kids out and into college. So I know it's possible. Have you reached out to like some of the guys that were there in Alabama and Georgia and see what they did to get it moving? Like I know Arkansas is more recent, but if you looked at like Alabama and Georgia, because they're like, especially Georgia, because Georgia's extremely successful at what they're doing.
I have. So I just spent a week with Ironclad Wrestling at their headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama. They have it's a really cool facility. It's Iron City. They have this wrestling building. It's not a wrestling room, it's a wrestling building.
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of a bank. It's a really cool facility, and they're doing some great stuff out there. I think what they're doing is very special too. But I mean, they're producing like savages are coming out of that state, and I think it's a matter of time before some of those bigger schools like University of Alabama picks up the sport of wrestling collegiately in that state. So I've started my own like networking efforts with our neighbors over to the east. I'm slowly making my way out to Georgia, although that's a little bit of a drive. But that's just an area that I think I need to like build upon, right? Let's see what those guys are doing to make them successful, and it's not necessarily techniques or having like savage wrestling room. This culture, how do we foster the culture of wrestling so that it's palatable at the youth and high school levels? How do we get college programs on board? Because I think that's like part of the secret sauce is making Arkansas very successful is their collegiate programs. Coach Pat Smith is doing amazing things. I think right now there's 70 in their state. I think there's 70 scholarships available in the state of Arkansas. So there's kids they're striving for fighting for scholarships. I think that helps foster that culture.
It's possible. It's kind of hit or miss too, right? Like I just came from South Carolina. They got 2 D1 programs in South Carolina. It doesn't seem to be helping the high school level too much yet. But I mean, you also got North Carolina, which has major D1 colleges in it, and they seem to be churning out some kids. Georgia doesn't really have any major college wrestling programs. Florida doesn't really have any major college wrestling. Florida's coming up too, but I mean, I think it just depends on. Whoa, what was that? I think it just kind of depends on like whatever Georgia and Alabama and Florida are kind of doing to succeed in a football and baseball state, whatever they did for that, and it helps that wrestling's the season in between both of those, which is kind of helpful. But I think that's like the common thread, like the whole Southeast has to figure out and roll with. Because like I grew up in Indiana. Indiana's a basketball state, so we had to compete like straight up same season against basketball in the state that's has a movie named after the state for basketball, right? So like, and we think, if we can figure that out, the South can figure out how to get the sport to grow in the season in between the 2 major sports that everyone wants to play. But Georgia seems to have it figured out. Miss Alabama seems to be figuring it out. So I mean, I think whatever they're doing, that needs to get spread to the whole Southeast. So whatever they're figuring out, I think that's like the key. The colleges help to some degree, but I mean, like, I think that main idea, whatever they did to get that point across, because like one of the big excuses I always heard, right, was like, oh, we're a football state. So what? What's that got to do with the winter? But people like almost get. I think people in the South, like the southern states, seem to just resign themselves to the fact that, oh, football is this, baseball, we just get the scraps. When you could be getting all those football players, you could definitely be getting those catchers that play baseball. But football players should be coming over in droves to wrestling in the South.
All right, Patrick, let me ask you a question. So what is your first milestone? I know, getting the 501c3 established, you got that. So what is your next milestone so you can gauge how successful you're going to be? Have you figured that out yet?
Taking small steps. I think that so the answer is I don't know. I'm kind of figuring it out. We're all kind of figuring it out. I think one of those first milestones, and it sounds kind of minute, but it's really, really big to make things happen, and that is scheduling.
Yeah,
I think we need to like get the schedule down on paper and figure things out. One of the Mississippiisms or the like intricacies of getting this sport started is that it comes with a few caveats, right? So I alluded to 1974 being our a sanctioning date in Mississippi, and it hasn't been unsanctioned since then. Wrestling has been a sanctioned sport in Mississippi since 1974. We just haven't had a real wrestling season. One of the stipulations in the Mississippi bylaws is that we are limited to 12 events throughout the year within the state.
Okay.
So one of the things that we'll have to do is figure out how we're going to go about doing a dual meet or a tri meet, quad meet. Do we do tournaments? Who's going to host them?
Did you say 12?
Say again?
Did you say 12?
Yeah, 12 events. So how do you define an event, right? That's a gathering of right. It's a logistical nightmare, but we're going to get around.
You have to run.
We're going to get around it by. We're going to do tries, quads, in tournaments. I think that's part of the secret sauce to making this successful, right, Chris? You're not even on the board. I see you like you have a headache developing now.
I've never heard the word events in my entire life. I've heard dates, and even 12 is low. Like I'd say the normal is at least 18. That's awful.
Yeah.
Oh
with the amount of participants.
So my question is, as a starting program, winning 12 could be considered any kind of great milestone for a startup program?
Just fielding a team would be a milestone.
I think in our eyes, it feels like a victory, right?
Okay.
So we take each one of those like little victories in stride, and it's something that wasn't here before. We're going to have 10, 11, however many. We're going to have that many more programs available to boys and girls throughout the state of Mississippi, and I think that that whether or not that's a good starting point or a bad starting point, that's our starting point. We got to work with what we got.
Have you given any thought to doing what some states do and letting 7th and 8th graders wrestle high school varsity?
We haven't talked about that. That's not a bad idea.
You want to get some numbers. You want to fill low weights. You want to get participation up. You go to a kid and be like, look, if you wrestle, you can wrestle in high school for 6 years. I know Alabama does that. Alabama does it for 7th and 8th grade. Minnesota does 7th and 8th grade. And then I know Kentucky and New York allow 8th graders. So I know there's a handful of states that I think North and South Dakota let 7th and 8th graders wrestle in high school. But it does a really good job of filling their numbers and drawing participation out, because these kids are like, well, I can get more time in high school sports if I choose wrestling instead of something else. Might be worth bringing up as an option and show that other states do it and it works. Still has 106 spots.
I think definitely have to have that conversation with the board and see that fits in with whatever caveats or Mississippiisms that we have to contend with. I like this part of the show where it's like three guys talking about wrestling and trying to like solve problems.
Yeah, and that's basically that's why I wanted this to be a test one, so I could just hear. See, I'm good at what I'm good at. You asked me what am I good at? I'm very good at telling the story. Once I have a clear understanding of what the story is, you know what I'm saying? So that's why I'm letting everybody speak so I can kind of get, okay, what am I seeing in my head? That way when we redo it, I will make sure the story goes where it's supposed to go so people can latch on to it and go, okay, I like this. It's something worth watching. You know what I'm saying? So let me ask you this. So since it's a starter program, how much time of actual wrestling training will you do before you even go to your first tournament? You know what I'm saying? Before your first actual match. Because everybody got to get some kind of skills under their belt before they compete, right?
It is. And I have yet to find someone that has an answer for how to approach this, because everyone has a different methodology. But I think practice officially starts October 11th. And then right around, I think it's the 23rd, that's our first scrimmage. That's going to be our first wrestle-offs, right? So we have to use common language, whatever the other sports are. So we're calling it a scrimmage. What it is that's a wrestle-off. That's where we're going to determine who goes into what place for the team, who makes the roster, who doesn't. And a few weeks later, I think it's November. It might not even be. We may start in October. I owe you guys an answer, but it's not that long. We have like 4 to 5 weeks to teach these guys and girls how to wrestle, what the rules are, and also get them conditioned so that they can go on and take on this undertaking of becoming a combat sports athlete in high school.
What week are you trying to have the state tournament?
We're gonna have the state tournament late February.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's also a very short flash to bang.
Yeah, I know that we when I was in high school, we started practice like the middle of October, and we didn't really start ramping our schedule up till like the weekend after Thanksgiving, early December is when we started like ramping it up. Where December, January, you had your dual meet during the week, you had your individual tournament on the weekend, and that was every week. You had a dual meet during the week, either a super dual, a quad, or an individual tournament on the weekend. We had 18 dates, so like it was boom, 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 boom. But pretty much October and November was all the whole thing was practice, cutting weight, getting down your weight, wrestle offs. It was a solid almost probably 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks before you start really ramping the schedule up and competing. So,
speaking of cutting weight, we also wanted to do weight certifications. So for some of the martial artists that may be watching that not familiar with that, there are some states, I believe it may be all states at this point, have a weight certification process where an athlete weighs in, take into consideration their body fat index, their hydration. They have to do a hydration test to make sure that they're not dehydrated, and it produces a chart that says how much weight they can lose throughout the season without getting below a certain body fat percentage. So it's really there to protect the athletes from themselves. And we're going to do the same thing.
It's like a per week. You get so many pounds per week you're allowed to go down. It's got to be like a lateral drop. But like something interesting happened because my kids wrestle in Indiana. That's where my kids live. It used to be like your certified weights were only the weights that were at the weight class you were wrestling. So like none of your weigh-ins before that counted until you got down. So Indiana just changed the rule this year where your weights on the way down as you're making your weight count towards your certification for your final weight. So these kids' weights are now these kids don't have to like get all the way down and then hope they stay there and make their cert weights, get enough cert weights in to be eligible for states. Now they can go down slow and get all their weights certified, and they're gonna get all the required weigh-ins that they need to be eligible to wrestle state at that weight class. I think that's gonna go a long way keeping kids from sucking weight down real hard or cheating the test. Because I mean, let's be honest, almost everyone cheats the test anyway.
So Patrick, let me ask you a question. So where are you getting your coaching staff from? Where are you going to be getting your refs from? You know, saying how are you recruiting talent to make sure it goes smoothly?
So this is an interesting like. So the problem's not that interesting. The problem is kind of frustrating, right? Like how do you grow coaches and refs out of thin air? You really don't. The interesting part is that like wrestling fans, people who have always wanted to be wrestling coaches are coming out of the woodwork. This is the opportunity. In Oxford, we're a small city. We're about 30,000 people, and I think our youth program that's going from elementary all the way up to middle school. We had over 40 kids signing up to start wrestling throughout the summer. That was cool. And we have 6 coaches that show up pretty consistently. So these are all a big number of them are veterans, this military community stepping up. We have transplants from Illinois, Missouri, Pennsylvania. We have a former college head coach that coaches middle schoolers. It's really cool to have him on board. But here's one of the part I wanted to get to that's like really interesting. The martial arts community stepping up, right? Like we got We have jujitsu schools and jujitsu academies that are stepping up and saying we are interested. We have a vested interest in this becoming a staple in our state. Grady Sue Hurley, a martial artist out of Tupelo, mixed martial arts owner of UFM, goes by the name of a boy named Sue. Hey, he's one of those like unsung heroes of this whole effort. You know, he didn't have a wrestling background, but you know, it definitely understood the value of what wrestling brought to MMA, what it brought to his gym, and has like opened up his facility for the Tupelo Wrestling Club. And while we get youth coming in to train and do wrestling, go outside the state to go compete right now, we also have like a number of people that are coming in to learn takedown defense and takedowns. And interestingly enough, also the mat work from folk style, how that translates over into MMA. So because we have those guys interested, right? Because we have fighters that are interested, they've been supportive in like opening up facilities. They've been supportive in becoming youth coaches. Over at Oxford, I have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt that is a wrestling coach. Never wrestled in his life, but I mean, he has a vested interest in growing the sport too. Referees, that's going to be challenging. We do have some football referees that are interested in helping the sport, kind of like, you know, nurturing the sport by becoming an official and contributing in that way. We're trying to tackle that problem right now. As a contingency, we're considering some coaches becoming officials too. You know, obviously you don't want that to happen because it's a conflict of interest. But at the same time, when you want to grow the sport from nothing, sometimes you got to work with what you have. So that's where we're looking for. That's our biggest limiting factor right now is referees. You know, where do you find them? How do you grow them? How do you get people interested in like taking on that responsibility? So we do have a referees certification coming up next weekend. This July 10th in Tupelo, Mississippi, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Okay, so here's the question. So this is for Chris and Patrick. So with this being a new program, like freestyle, Greco, folk, I mean, how does all that tie into all of this? Is it going to be folks out route the rip, or?
Well, the high school has to be, but
yeah,
high school has to be. But I mean, I think you're going to benefit in the long run by making sure freestyle and Greco are present off the rip.
So Patrick, so that being said, Patrick, how does that, you know, when you're dealing with coaches, do you have to have a conversation? What is your format? Do you know folk? Do you know Greco? Do you know freestyle? Or you just let it go and you mold it as it goes?
That is a conversation that we have to have. One of the coaches, his name's Joe Hill. He's a judo guy. You know, he grew up doing judo and also trained in freestyle Greco-Roman wrestling. And he didn't do folk style wrestling like in high school, but he definitely picked it up. I think he's competed a few times. So his wrestling knowledge is essentially like it's Greco and freestyle, along with the judo background that he has. So there is like a little bit of development and shaping to talk about folk style, to kind of get coaches used to it. But our primary aim right now is use folk styles to grow the sport. Chris is right though. you gotta have the other two styles to like make it a sustainable venture.
Yeah, it'll be tough.
Especially for your adults. If you want adults to start competing and training, there's more opportunities as a Greco-Roman and freestyle friendly culture.
Well, also, I mean, these kids get recruited mainly because of Fargo. So if you ever want to get these kids into college, like Sam Latona didn't get recruited because he won 6 Alabama state titles. He got recruited because he All-Americaned at Fargo multiple times. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a reality of the situation. Like, what? So you guys do everything youth, middle, and high school, right? So what's do you have milestones like based on how many kids what's your goal for, like, when we host the kids state championship, how many kids we want in the tournament? Like, how many, what are we trying to get to? At what number do we say, okay, we have a sustainable youth program in Mississippi? And then once you get there, it's like, okay, now we got high school. Once we get our 100 schools or whatever, okay, when's our first trip to Fargo? When's our first trip to Super 32s? Like, how many kids we got showing up at Super 32s? How many kids we got going to Fargo? Like, so, like, to kind of Darren's question, like, there's multiple milestones because they're building from scratch, basically. So there's multiple milestones. You can't really have sustainable high school till you have sustainable youth. And you can't really have a sustainable input into college wrestling without kids showing up to Fargo. So, like, there's multiple steps to it. And then, like, the referee problem, that gets solved over time, right? Because eventually you have these high school kids in the off season reffing the little kids matches, learning how to ref. And then you get them, some of them are going to stick because, like I said, at this point in my life now, I'm mainly a referee. Like, I enjoy it. I ref all 3 styles. I'll coach, but I don't really, like, I started as a wrestler and a coach. And now I'm like, I just want to ref. There's no dog in the fight. I get paid some money and I get to watch all kinds of wrestling. So, like, refereeing is actually the funnest part of the sport for me at this point. So I think, like, the refereeing can solve itself over time as you get more high school kids that graduate high school, stay in the area, want to stay involved in the sport. And refereeing is, like, the easiest way to stay in the sport, as long as, like, you're cultivating it when they're younger.
So wouldn't you want to keep, okay, before you go to Fargo or some of the bigger tournaments, wouldn't you want to build their confidence locally first, to where they can see where they match up? And once you go to Fargo, you're going to get all the heavy hitters, getting blown off the mat. That could be debilitating. You know what I'm saying?
It's a balance, right? It's a balance. Yeah. It's a balance. Like, some of these kids, like, there's the other side of the argument is once they go there and they're like, oh, that's what a collar tie is supposed to feel like. Oh, that's what a single leg's supposed to feel like when it's done right. Oh, that's what they mean by redirecting somebody. And then those kids come back home and they wrestle completely different because they felt they have felt what it's like to be done to them at an elite level. And they're like, oh, that's what it's supposed to be like. Mm-hmm. And they come home with a different mindset and they wrestle a little bit different. So there's a balance to it, but at some point they have to feel like what it's like to have someone that's that much better than you grab you by the neck and you can't do anything about it. That's just part of the sport. I guess.
All right, we're getting close to the hour mark. So, Patrick, it's time for you to give your elevator pitch. We've been kicking it and having a great time, but like I said, so now I want you to tell the world what all this means and what you're really trying to accomplish and what you want them to know, that why you should get involved, why you should support. If you put up a GoFundMe page, why should I give you my money? You know what I'm saying? This give us your best elevator pitch so fans can really have a good idea. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like the history of your town, anything that goes with it. Like I said, hey, this is a rich town. This is a cultural town. Would I get in my car or would I fly to your town and hang out. You know what I'm saying? That type of conversation. The floor is yours.
Hey, very, very simply, I invite you to be a part of this process. I invite you to be a part of history. We need the entire wrestling and combat sports community behind this effort. Ruined my elevator, man.
My mom called.
Yeah. So I know you might edit this, but hey, here's the deal. I invite you to be a part of history. I invite you to join us as we trudge the road of happy destiny. Looking forward into the future as we bring wrestling into its final American frontier. And we need the entire wrestling and combat sports community behind this effort to make it happen. So, help. Hey, Coach, you're on mute.
Turn your mic on, clown.
All right, my bad. All right, like I said, so this is our first run to kind of get to know each other, to kind of see how we bounce off each other, how we work together. So we're gonna clean this up. I'm gonna download it. And I'm gonna send you guys the link so you can listen to it all. That way we can start scripting out where we want to go with this. Because I want this to be like the first day. Because me and Chris had a conversation, about turning this into a documentary. Chris feels like Chris is really full of himself. You don't know Chris; he's a effing pain in the fucking ass, right? So he got it in his mind that this is an extraordinary thing for me to do, right? So, and I agree. I'm just playing, but our goal is to turn this into a documentary that you can have an archived history of where you start and where it goes. So that whenever somebody wants to research your town and how this got started, they will research the documentary. You know what I'm saying? So that's the goal of all this. So we're gonna tweak this until we get it where it needs to be, so that we can take steps with you to get it out to where it needs to go. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm excited to be a part of it. I think it's an awesome thing to witness from the ground up. You know what I'm saying? It always, when you go to a big college and it's already done, you don't know the little guy that helped, along the way, the guy that, that had to keep things together by string and gum. You never meet that guy. You meet the alumni who got all the money speaking on behalf of, of the whole school. But sometimes it's the little guy that has the better story. You know what I'm saying? So that is definitely the plan. And then we're going to figure this out. So like I said, we're going to close this out and then we're going to plan for the next one. But stay online. I'm just going to close the broadcast and we're going to keep on talking. All right, Fight fans, it's Coach D. You heard what it is. You know what it's going to be. It's going to be something new. So get ready for it all. This is Coach D. You hear from me again. Peace out.
Later.